And that brings us to our main topic, where we're talking about how to start a podcast in 2021. Gabe,
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot to consider here when you're starting a podcast. So where do you want to start?
You want to start with a podcast.
Well, that's a good place to start. But I mean, you could choose like microphones, getting equipment, maybe choosing a topic or idea to start with.
True. Yeah.
Where do you think we should kind of begin guiding our audience?
Well, I think first just start with explaining to people, if they don't know what a podcast is.
You're listening to one.
Congratulations. You've somehow stumbled across something you didn't even know what it was, and you're listening to it now. No, podcasts have been around for really a long time. It's kind of crazy. Apple launched the podcast app, I think, was that
So
with
long
iOS?
ago. Jeez, I can't
when they
even
launched
remember.
the iPhone, or with iPod, actually, they had the podcast. So really from, I think, 2008, I heard there was 22% of people reported listening to podcasts back in 2008. Now that's up to, I think, around 70% of all people. The number of podcasts out there, it's really interesting. Now, there's technically over 1,750,000 shows.
That's huge. Is that an episode or are these individual
shows?
Wow.
There's 43 million episodes out there.
Jeez.
But the big thing to know is that number of shows is not actually really accurate of how many shows are out there.
Because they're not live.
Yeah, exactly. There's technically only around 800 to 900,000 active shows. That's the generally assumed number. Granted, this is up from, I think, about a year ago or so when we talked about it, or a year and a half ago. It was about, I think, 560,000, maybe 600,000 or so.
Almost doubled, it sounds like.
Yeah, kind of a little bit. It's definitely going up really fast. And the thing with the active shows and the non-active shows might not be that the podcast failed. Sometimes people just, they do a 9-episode run and that's it, right?
Yeah,
It's a planned like serial story standalone. Boom, they leave it. It's done forever. And so I personally, I love that. It's kind of good art. But also 50% of all podcasts never make it past 7 episodes. So you do have a lot of people who start podcasting and then other stuff comes up in their life maybe they're just, they get bored with it.
It can be challenging to maintain that sort of schedule and the consistency required to really have a more regular podcast.
Yeah. Now, what do you listen to for podcasts?
That's a really good question. So the podcast, you want like the shows specifically?
Or let's just,
genres?
Yeah, I guess shows or genres or what?
I mean, so I guess I'm into 2 categories.
Okay.
I really like tech and I really like personal development and improvement. And so for tech, we're talking Vergecast, the Waveform podcast by Marquez Brownlee, and Tech Meme Ride Home. Love those shows.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a premium subscriber to Tech Meme Ride Home, so supporting them. And then for my sort of personal development, we have the Tim Ferriss Show, Mindset Mentor by Rob Dial, and those are kind of the ones I have there. So a little bit of both. What are you kind of listening to for podcasts?
I'm personally probably my most listened to one is the Daily by the New York Times. So that's every day. That's one of the top podcasts out there if you look on the charts, and it's just so prolific. They have a huge team working on it. It's backed by the New York Times. Very good one to stay up to date with current events. I also listen to a lot of comedy podcasts and stuff. Jake and Amir, their If I Were You show. There's this whole network out there called HeadGum. They have a lot of comedy podcasts. You might already listen to stuff by them. And also there's Hamish and Andy. I love this Australian duo. They started on the radio way back when. They're still putting out podcasts now. They are like OG podcasters because they started on the radio and we're just uploading radio shows to podcast networks. But yeah, so mine actually is more in line with what most people listen to because comedy is the most popular podcasting genre.
Yeah.
Next is education and then news. So you're falling, I think your stuff probably is falling under education.
Yeah, probably education.
Then you also, of course, have, your story-based podcast. You have the crime junkie genre, like type stuff. There's a bunch of different genres, and the average person listens to about 7 episodes a week. Where are you falling in there?
Oh, I'm definitely above that.
Yeah, I am too. I'm probably more like 15 to 20.
My hack is I started listening to episodes at 2 times speed. Gabe disapproves of this.
Wait, and I think I saw, I don't think I put this in here, but I saw that 19% of people do that. They listen to it at a faster rate.
It's so great.
You are in the minority there. And also you're in the area of disdain by everyone who spends hours editing any podcast.
I appreciate it twice as much because
I get if you're speeding up our, conversational podcast, all right, fine. But if it's like a really well-produced podcast, like The Daily or, some story-based, and you're speeding that up, guys, come on. Like,
Gabe disapproves. I'm all for it. I love it. I feel like I consume so much more content in the same period of time. That's what I love about it. And plus, you don't realize it until you listen at 1.5 to 2 times speed. People talk slowly. We're talking slowly right now. I dare you to speed us up. Try it out.
The Google podcast actually does have an interesting thing where it doesn't speed up the podcast, but it just cuts out the silence breaks.
That actually tripped me up. So I found 2 times speed with the pauses just naturally in there was actually better for me than taking the pauses out, because the pauses created kind of jump cuts. It was just unusual for my ears to hear that.
Yeah, that does kind of make sense. Like, we're used to speech flowing.
These are
with
great though.
Pauses, and then, not like if you turn up the speed of the speech, fine, but there still needs to be a pause relative to.
Yeah, people breathe.
Yeah,
it's a normal thing to do.
Well, so using what we talked about, the first thing you want to do is figure out where you're going to land your show. And because there are so many podcasts out there, the big thing now is to really go niche and to do something that you want that is sustainable. Because like I said, not many, or like half the podcasts die before they get to 7 episodes. So it's key to pick something that is not only interesting to you and that you can imagine doing week after week, but something that other people are going to find interesting too.
Questions I had for how to pick a topic, like what are you passionate about? What are you interested in learning more about? And what do you talk to your friends at lunch about? Those kinds of like ideas to get your mind churning as to what may be a good subject matter for you to turn into
now
a
the thing
podcast.
that's very key though is a lot of people have conversational podcasts out there. I mean, that's what we did. That's what everyone wants to do. If you look at someone like Amazon, for example, they're not even accepting submissions for like they have this, I think it's a grant out or something where you can bring your podcast on. They're not even accepting ones if they're conversational. Like, they want stuff that's pitched, that's scripted, that's either news, that's covering a specific topic,
more like
that's
a show.
fiction based. Yeah, because I think people do like conversational stuff, but right now that is just super saturated because it's
probably the lowest bar to entry. It's so easy to get into.
It's super easy. I mean, we just
you
plop down in front of some mics, everyone, and it sounds like the most fun, right? It doesn't sound fun necessarily to script out stuff and talk about
Read your script just on air.
Yeah, so I mean,
are you listening to scripted podcasts? What do you like? What's your breakdown?
The Daily by the New York Times is kind of scripted, I guess. In that it's they tie it together. It's kind of like a documentary, right, where they have interviews and stuff, but then they tie it together with little pieces and they edit it and stuff. So that's kind of scripted. Yeah, I guess I'm not though. So maybe
I only listen to one scripted show, and it's The Mindset Mentor by Rob Dial.
Yeah.
He actually writes a script and then kind of more or less reads a script, but it's conversational and flow. So yeah, I think most of them are just, you get 2 people on a show, they banter back and forth, and you're either gleaning information or it's super funny and entertaining. So
yeah, so I think that conversational definitely is more popular, but what I think people should definitely consider is something called Microcasts, which are definitely an under-targeted area, which is essentially going for, most podcasts are like 30 to, I'd say, 50 minutes. That's at least for me when I find.
Some of them, I'd say 30,
some are longer.
30 minutes is probably the low end. The shortest one I listen to is like 15.
Yeah.
But then I think 30 is probably like medium. I think most are around the 1 to 2 hour mark. Yeah. And the PKA podcast is 4 hours.
Yeah. See, some are insane. And so I think that is like a really oversaturated area. And some people do like that. And I can see the appeal because it's like you can commit to just listening to something for a long time. It's not stressful that switching or anything. It's like, I'm going to go I'm going to go work out. I'm going to go for a drive, whatever. You have this nice long podcast, this chunk of content. However, I do think microcasts, anything really under 20 minutes, are going to see a rise. And that's going to be more scripted stuff and potentially could be something you do daily, 2 times a week, 3 times a week. Like, it could have a higher turnover rate and thus be better for ads.
Right. And I think, we haven't talked about it yet, but we'll talk about where you can publish and host your podcast.
Yeah.
And I think what a lot of people are doing is also uploading to YouTube. And YouTube tends to like sort of the shorter clips that are long enough, over 8 minutes, to get that ad revenue in, but also a little bit longer that gets people hooked and engaged in the content. Joe Rogan does this with clips. You actually just started doing with
Well,
Pinch.
I think he's kind of stopping.
Yeah, because of the
Spotify deal.
Yeah.
We'll do that too if Spotify comes out and signs us to a multi-million-dollar deal. But
I think I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
So no, I see where you're going with that though. Basically, if you're doing a shorter microcast or something like that, it's naturally going to be
it's better
more
for
targeted.
YouTube, more targeted, better for search. You can optimize it a little bit better for that platform.
Yeah,
and that may be something to consider. Should we talk about how we got started with our podcast? Like what?
I mean, it was basically like you were saying, it's like, what do you talk about with a friend? What do you talk about at lunch? Like we always would talk about tech when we were hanging out, when we were grabbing lunch or whatever. And so I was like, why don't we just record this?
Yeah, and put it online.
I mean, there is like, now I always do come across this with YouTubers, content creators, and just everyone nowadays, like you got to have a side hustle, it feels like, and it's like you got to monetize everything. So I kind of like, I don't know. I overall it's been enjoyable, but I would definitely like, put a damper on. All right, every conversation I have has to be recorded and uploaded to a podcast. That type of mentality.
Sure. And do you feel like podcasts make money? Like, should our listeners be focused on making money with their podcast?
No, that's the biggest thing I think if you're going to start a podcast, probably even before you think about what the podcast is having realistic expectations. Like, you most likely are not going to be making money within the first year, 2 years. I mean,
3 years,
4 years. I mean, it definitely depends on how big of an audience you already have, right? If you already have, 50,000, 100,000 subscribers on your YouTube or maybe on your Instagram or something, so you can push an already established audience, yeah, you're more likely that you could, get making money sooner. But I also think, don't think that you're going to put it like a YouTube video, you're going to put out a podcast and it's going to blow up, or like a TikTok, you can upload it and get millions of views. That's not how podcasts work. The discovery is a lot slower, and there's not that search thing. So really, I think I've heard somewhere that 90% of all listens for a podcast episode happen with, or maybe 96% happen within the first 48 hours. So like once you upload that podcast, whatever audience that's getting it in their feed, that's all that's going to be listened to.
Typically, yeah.
And then it's done.
I use Anchor for my Best Phone Plans podcast, and they calculate audience size based on average number of listens each episode gets after a 30-day period. So they actually give it a really long period of time. Like people are busy, maybe they only listen on weekends, that kind of thing. But to your point, the listens really spike within those first 48 hours, and then it's a pretty steep drop off.
Yeah. So I would definitely say have realistic expectations. Don't think you're going to have your podcast blow up overnight. Don't think that it's going to be making you a ton of money. And yeah, it's just, and that's why you really have to pick something that you like and something that is fun.
Sustainable.
You don't want to go with like, oh, this is a huge idea, I'm going to put a ton of money into each episode. And which kind of brings us to recording and like how you make the episode.
Yeah, actually, real quick, I want to sneak something in there. I think my mom actually sent me something that most podcasts don't actually make money. Yeah. And the podcast is really a front to connect with the audience. So you build an audience on the podcast. And then when you do have a product, service, or whatever, that's when you plug your product or service on the podcast, and it helps drive some additional revenue. So for example, I listen to The Mindset Mentor by Rob Dial. He promotes his coaching. So he offers great information in the podcast, has built a podcast audience. Whenever he's launching a new course or coaching program that's available to listeners, he'll plug it on the podcast. So I think sponsorships, because podcasts just reach typically much smaller audiences, it's harder to track, what the click-through rate is and even, what the impressions are. I think that's why people just kind of use it as a front to engage in a meaningful way with the audience. And then when they have it, promote or sponsor something they're working on. So just want to sneak that in there.
We are not doing that, really, I feel like.
No, we're not. We're not. We should actually take our own
digital
advice.
Tech reviews and tips, or Unplanned Creative and Best Phone Plans is places.
Check us out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or just listen to this. Fine. We don't really care.
We love it.
Yeah. So now moving on to what I was going to talk about, which is how to start recording it and not have a bunch of overhead expenses that makes it really unsustainable and makes it like you need to start making money quickly. First off, is going to be microphones.
That's probably the number one most important thing you need, I would say.
Well, I mean, not technically. Anchor does have an app that you can record right on your phone.
That's true.
But overall, yeah, having a good microphone or
it really helps.
Decent microphone, you can really get a good USB microphone for under $100 easily, and that will get you started. Because the big thing to emphasize is that treating your room, and by that I mean like don't not bringing candy into your room and going here's a nice treat for you. What I mean is putting up some blankets, some foam paneling, something basically to make it so you don't have a lot of echo. That is by far more important than having a good quality microphone.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you could even consider recording in your closet. Like if you grab This would actually be interesting to test. Grab your Apple earbuds, those cheap $30 headphones. Go into your closet where your clothes are. Just your closet, your laptop, and just record. And I think because of how dead your closet space will be, odds are you'll get decent quality audio just to start off. And that's the whole, like, you want to start off as frictionless as possible. Once you feel like you're getting in the groove and it makes sense to upgrade, or maybe you have an alternative use for a mic. Like Gabe and I make YouTube videos. So of course, getting a nice quality microphone doubles as a purpose for a YouTube video and for the podcast. So it makes sense for us. But if you're just getting started, like maybe something a little bit cheaper to start. And
when I started recording, because I actually got into YouTube videos originally through recording songs and music, so I started with the audio side. Actually, I bought a $40 Radio Shack microphone, and I was going into my like a closet in my parents' house, and just surrounded by blankets and old clothes and stuff, and wrapping in the closet, and then coming out. I'd had the wire going out to the computer, and then I'd like check that. All right, gotta re-record. Go back in. Spitting those beats, or like it. I do get why you don't want to be in the closet, because it does. It's not a very sexy like recording setup, right? You don't see top podcasts them recording in closets. Maybe we should normalize that, right? But yeah, eventually, like I did build a little kind of like studio setup in my attic. But the thing is, you can totally start recording in your closet, especially if you're not recording video for your podcast. Who really cares? And there are many podcasts I've seen out there who are simply recording video in their closet. Like the overall thing is having good audio quality. And so basically,
treating the space is probably more important than the actual microphone, especially when you're starting and you're on more of a budget. I will say though, if you are looking for a microphone, you're probably going to want to consider a condenser microphone, which is what Gabe and I are using now.
No.
Dynamic
microphone.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Literally, I wrote.
Stetson should go listen to our previous episode. It's episode 32, where we actually did a deep dive on the types of microphones you want to use for YouTube and for podcasts and streaming. And yeah, basically, essentially, dynamic microphones are great for, this stuff like this, where we're not necessarily getting the perfect mic setup. They're used often in concerts a lot too. They're very durable and stuff, whereas condenser mics are more often the ones that you're going to find like doing voiceovers and recording vocals for songs.
Yeah, so my bad. Yeah. Dynamic microphones, and you're probably going to want to look for a cardioid or supercardioid pickup pattern. We're using cardioid.
You're not usually going to find a dynamic mic that isn't that also.
Yeah, so there you go.
But yeah, so that is what you're going to use for microphones. And yeah, you can usually get one for easily under $150. And I'd recommend USB probably is the way to go. Start off, keeps it simple, plug and play type stuff. Maybe down the road, get an XLR adapter or something like that. Some mics, offer both, but usually those are most often going to be condenser microphones.
Yeah, and they're more expensive sometimes.
I got like
the Shure SV7 or SM7V or whatever, and that was $250. These mics we're using now were only $100, the Rode pod mics. But we need the XLR input, so if you need an interface or some kind of recorder,
you can get a little XLR recorder for easily, under like $200. So they're looking at if it's just you, one of these and a recorder, $300. That's a pretty decent price, depending on how much money you have, of course, to put in. But like I said, you can easily just start with an iPhone. The key is to just start getting content up there, getting more comfortable talking, and it's like you can always buy better gear down the road. You can't start your podcast in the past. So it's better to start recording now and upgrade your gear later.
I completely agree. And I think it's kind of like when you start a YouTube channel or anything new.
Just when you start anything, literally anything.
The first like 3 or 5 whatever videos, podcasts you make, they're gonna be learning experiences, and you're gonna learn exponentially. So they may not be great. They may not be to your highest quality standards. You may not even want to publish them. But the fact that you're sitting down and recording them means you're learning from them. You can implement and improve on the next episode. And finally, by the time people are discovering your podcast, you're ready to go. The quality is a little bit higher. I would almost
say you do want to publish them, because I like having my old videos to show the growth of like how bad it was. Every time I'm feeling like, oh, my videos are so bad because I've watched too many of like Marquez Brownlee's or like Casey Neistat's or someone like that, or watched too many good movies. I'm like, my videos suck. It's like I go back, watch my old ones, like, well, at least I'm progressing, right? I might not be at that level yet, but you got to just start from somewhere. So now that you have a microphone, let's say, you got to plug it into your computer. That's usually the way you're going to go, or you're going to record it separately on an audio recorder. then what are you going to do with that audio?
Yeah, how do you edit it? What's the software?
So most often now, you put in the little notes here. You said Final Cut is what unexperienced novices make. Actually, that's what video creators who are inexperienced use because they know Final Cut. Final Cut is actually confusing for a lot of people.
It's for editing videos.
Yeah.
For those.
So
who don't know.
The most people, if you haven't created videos and aren't using Final Cut and you just have a Mac, the easiest to use is GarageBand. If you're on a PC, Audacity is pretty good as well. They're very simple programs. It's not going to have all the things you need, but honestly, for podcasts, really, unless you're doing something super complicated, it's a lot of times just syncing up tracks, maybe adding an intro and outro, cutting out some of the dead space, and maybe adding an EQ, and that's it.
And Bob's your uncle. Yeah, absolutely.
I use personally Logic Pro X.
Yeah, he's a pro.
I don't know why I do that. I honestly could get away with using GarageBand totally fine, but Logic Pro is just a little easier.
Feel like you're getting use out of your $200 Apple software program.
Yeah, right. And if I did have to keep paying for it, right, and it wasn't just a one-time buy, I would not be paying for it. I would get rid of it most likely. But yeah, that's what I'd recommend. Don't use Final Cut Pro. That just makes me cringe every time. And what I do recommend though is basically create a project file, and then just every week you can just drop it in and use that as a template. And drop your new audio in, delete it, drop new audio in, and you can keep the settings usually week to week, and keep your intro there, and then move your outro to be at the end, and you should be good.
That sounds great. And we actually tested some other software too, like if you want to have guests on the show.
Yeah, this is a big thing, especially now where we're seeing such a increase in live streaming for one, and also the fact that COVID's here, people can't have guests in studio, having remote guests in. So what are the two things that you'd recommend there?
So the two pieces of software that I found, and we actually tried one of them. First one's Zencastr.
Well, we've tried both of them, but only one on this podcast.
First one's Zencastr. This is you basically make a URL, you share it with your friends, they join the URL, and it's just like a recording studio interface. There's a big button that says record. People type their names in so you can see who's who, and you can see little audio waveforms. Super easy. All the audio is automatically synced together, and there's also a chat feature so you can message anyone like, hey, like we're bringing you on now, or you can mute a certain guest if they're having problems, or it's time for someone else to speak, things like that.
Just muting people.
Yeah, no, I'm done with you.
Yeah, you're having problems.
The interesting thing with Zencastr is they offer a post-production processing service, so they can actually edit the audio for you to potentially improve.
I think this is auto though. I don't think it's. They make it sound like it's someone sitting there editing it, but I think it's just
pouring their love into your podcast. Like, oh, I got to make this person sound.
I think it's just an auto, just settings applied.
Yeah, some gains. So there's a free version, up to 2 guests and 8 hours of recording per month. And the paid one is $20 a month with unlimited guests and unlimited recording times with 10 hours of post-production included. And the second software is StreamYard. This is actually better suited for YouTube videos.
Better suited for streaming.
Yeah, and live streaming. So you can actually live stream simultaneously to YouTube, Twitch, and a third platform. But the reason I like to use it for streaming on YouTube is because you can have multiple guests, I think 6 guests, and you can just download the audio recording after the live stream. It's not the highest quality, but the fact you can have so many people so seamlessly join, and that fact that you're streaming it to YouTube makes it kind of a great double-edged sword for what I do, where I do a live stream, I get the audio, and then I publish it as a proper podcast episode. And Gabe, you found one earlier today. I can't remember the name of it. It was like
Riverside.fm.
Yeah, that was a little bit more expensive. Plans started at $9 a month, but it was only like 2 hours.
That one has video built in though, is the key thing. So where Zoom can sometimes lag and stuff like that and applies weird features, this one doesn't. It actually records all your stuff on the device of the person that's doing it, which is something I think Zencastr also does, and then uploads it after. Zencastr is supposedly working on video, chatting or video, like, Zoom copycat type thing, but who knows when that will be out. They're probably just trying to keep up with the number of users who are jumping on their platform. So yeah, that is really what to use if you're doing remote interviews or stuff like that. Now the final thing, which is really the most confusing when you're getting into podcasting, is unlike YouTube or Instagram, like these platforms that are just platforms, proprietary, they have it locked down. If you want to, upload a YouTube video, you can't upload a video on some other site and have it go to YouTube. You have to go to YouTube, upload it right there. Podcasting is not platform specific, at least not right now. And so it's done using this thing called RSS feeds, which is a really old school
It stands for really simple syndication feed.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can use it for news too. News can also use RSS feeds. But for podcasts, basically what it does is you give a link, so you upload your podcast to a website, wherever it is, and then you give a link to iTunes or whatever the different, Spotify, and they are able to just check that link to see if there's a new file sitting there waiting for them to grab and, then kind of like push to their site.
Yeah, so everything is hosted on whatever hosting platform you choose, and then it's more or less automatically imported into the podcast
I don't even
services.
know. I don't think it's imported.
It's not even imported. They just display the information.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a display window. It's kind of like if you have a store, but you sell on Amazon, but it sells through or another store, right? Kind of type thing. I don't know. It's like you're displaying your goods in a store window. That's kind of what it is.
It's actually more like, I would say, Amazon, where everything's just in a warehouse and it's there and ready to go. But then the website, everything looks beautiful and is ready to ship.
We're both having a bad time making metaphors for this.
Well, that's okay. There's a bunch of different platforms.
Yeah.
Which one should people consider?
I mean, people should consider all of them potentially. But the big thing, if we're trying to keep things free, is...
Go with the free one.
Which
is?
Unfortunately, it's Anchor. And I say unfortunately because they're owned by Spotify. Yeah. And this kind of gives me a bit of a reservation because I wondered down the road, is Apple giving preference? Apple can obviously see where a podcast is coming from. Are they pushing down and suppressing ones that are hosted on Spotify? Is Spotify pushing up ones that are on Anchor, or are they, different things, right? But that's the free one out there. Do they have a paid one even, or?
I don't even think there is a paid option, to be honest. In fact, they will pay you, and this is the big thing why a lot of people just starting out choose it. It's free. And there's the opportunity for paid advertisements and integrations. The way it works is you basically have your podcast episode. Typically, you break it up into chunks. You have a part 1 and a part 2, and then you can do an ad slot that's in there. And the way Anchor works is they put the ad slot in, but the ad can be dynamically filled with a different ad break depending on current promotions or whatever you have at a time. So even though the episode is recorded, the ads can still change based on what's current, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and the key thing to mention right now is we are not on Anchor, and we are not sponsored by them. So I kind of did this podcast before we might switch to them so that we are completely unbiased.
It's unbiased. I'm using them for best phone plans, but it was just because it was free and I wanted to try it out. The one I really like is fireside.fm. Unfortunately, it's basically $9 to $19 per month, depending on how many listens and downloads your show gets. But this allows you to create a completely customizable website to complement your podcast. And you can get a custom domain to go with it. It looks really, really nice. Tyler Stallman uses this for his podcast, the Stallman Podcast. But unfortunately, just that price point for a show that wasn't even making money, it just didn't make sense to go with that to start with.
Yeah, and the one we actually are currently using and is oftentimes recommended is Podbean. This is, I forget what the cost is. Is it
I think it's $9 a month.
Yeah, it's around $9 a month or so when you pay for it annually. And it's all right. I haven't had any complaints, really. The analytics aren't the best, but you're not going to get the level of analytics with a YouTube video just because it's kind of spread out over multiple platforms.
Yeah.
But, the main thing is the fact that Anchor is free and offers the same exact thing in a lot of ways. So
why pay? It's
really a hard argument. We're gonna be probably switching to Anchor, but we'll let you know definitely for sure.
The analytics were actually interesting too because Anchor is using Spotify's analytics, so you can actually see age, gender, geographic location, estimated audience size, listening platforms, things like that. So I kind of agree with you that it's a bummer. Anchor feels like they're kind of dominating their space or starting to dominate the space. But really, for what they're offering for free, it's pretty incredible, and I appreciate the opportunity.
I kind of wonder if we'll see Apple offering a similar thing.
I hope so.
We did hear they were potentially launching a premium podcast kind of.
Right, they could potentially pay podcasters.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting scenario.
And we've heard Amazon, obviously, they're jumping into it a ton. They bought, what was it, Wonder something?
I actually can't. There's so many podcast acquisitions recently.
And then Twitter bought someone. Yeah, everyone's trying to get into the podcasting space, not just people podcasting, but also these big tech companies. So, keep it fluid. Don't be invested too much in one hosting platform. The good thing to note is that unlike YouTube, if you want to switch to Vimeo and you had to then, all right, I got to re-upload all my videos, what these podcasting things are able to do, because essentially you can just give your RSS feed link to the whatever platform you want to switch, and they can just take all that info and boom, it's all there.
They import it. They get everything all set up.
I think you will lose your stats and stuff. And
like that's okay.
Hey, if you do it and you just remember what you're at, download the CSV file or whatever, then you'll be good to go. So yeah, those are the 3 or 4 ways. There's also Buzzsprout I've heard of is pretty good. Bunch of different ones out there, but that's basically the way to get into podcasting from a technical standpoint. I think, right? Is there anything else you have to cover?
I think we covered pretty much everything. As I was saying,
yeah, uploading to YouTube is an interesting thing. You see some podcasts doing it. We do it. We've been trying to do clips more a little bit. And then on Instagram and stuff and Twitter, how to promote a podcast, you often see people uploading clips either with video. Video works like as a social media person. I know video is the most engaging way you can do it. But if you can only do the audio with the little waveform thing, there are services that will do that, or even just audio or some links or stuff like that with pictures. Yeah, the big thing is trying to leverage social media to get your podcast out there because, like I said, it's not really a good built-in discovery method right now.
Yeah, it is definitely true. I think the big breakthrough I think we're waiting to have is the YouTube for podcasts, where it's more SEO based.
I think what it is what they call VSEO, which is voice SEO.
Oh, so you can actually search through the transcript,
which is something Google is starting to get into. Apple has started to do, and it will only get better with time. But basically, yeah, it will allow
auto transcripts of all the episodes, bring you to the exact spot you're looking for,
and like the ability also to search with your voice for.
That is so
like
cool.
via an Amazon Echo or Google Assistant or Siri.
Yeah, I think so. The big thing, Gabe, you mentioned 50%, more than 50% of podcasts.
50% of podcasts
they fail after
they don't make it past 7 episodes.
Yeah, so I think the big thing here is start with basically the MVP, minimum viable product, the cheapest equipment you have, the free podcast hosting on Anchor. Make it past 7 episodes. And just see what it's like.
And don't worry about listeners. The only thing you can control is that you keep putting out episodes on whatever schedule you want and that you keep it fun. And that's really it.